He's going to venture to La La Land, where we have alien species that we've never actually discovered, where we can transport human minds into robots, and where we can determine that somebody born of two human parents would not actually be a human. So when the time comes that we actually discover those things actually happening, we'll humor them. But up until this point, I would think we should stick to reality.
Saying that a hypothetical is unrealistic is just not going to be relevant. The argument which my opponent is going to lay out is quite simple and can be, I guess, formalized in the following way. Premise 1, it is wrong to kill an innocent human being. Premise 2, a human fetus is an innocent human being. Conclusion, therefore, it is wrong to kill a human fetus. Inevitably, most people on my side of the debate will start by challenging the second premise. I actually think that's a mistake. I'm completely ready to grant that a human fetus is an innocent living member of the species Homo sapien. What I'm not willing to grant is the first premise. To be more specific, I do not believe that moral status should be granted based on one's membership with the species Homo sapien. I would defend the position that whether a being is or is not a member of our species is in itself no more relevant to the wrongness of killing it than whether it is or is not a member of our race or our sex or our eye color category or whatever. To reiterate, I believe the conservative defense of the life of the fetus is based on a characteristic that lacks moral significance. Once we've realized this, the question shifts. Rather than arbitrarily valuing the fetus because it's technically a human, we can look at it based on the actual characteristics it possesses and asks whether the characteristics which are morally relevant are possessed by the fetus, things like sentience, consciousness, etc. If my opponent wants to defend the view that the moral status is granted by species membership rather than any of the morally relevant traits that I listed, he's going to have to face some pretty repugnant conclusions. Let's say, for example, we scanned your DNA and it turned out that you were not a human somehow, despite you still possessing all of the mental and physical attributes that you currently possess. Would you suddenly lose moral value? Or what if, while exploring the cosmos, we came across an alien civilization that looked and acted like humans, were as intelligent and as emotionally complex as humans, were morally good, only wanted to help each other and other species, etc.? Would these beings lack the right to moral consideration in virtue of them not being human? What if we took the minds of all the humans on Earth and transported them into non-human vessels, say robot bodies or something like that? Would we all of a sudden lose moral value, right? Clearly, we can't accept these conclusions. What these tell us is that moral value cannot be rooted in something as arbitrary as species membership, but rather it has to be rooted in the actual, phenomenological and mental traits that we possess, like the ability to have conscious experience pleasure and pain, etc. So that would be my opening statement.
Zen, you're up.
All right. Thank you for having me on again, guys.
It's not going to go the same way, I promise.
Yeah, I am well aware of that. I'm pro-life. I oppose all abortions. Mouthy's got it. He hit the nail on the head with those first two premises. Human life begins at conception. Innocent human is being killed in an abortion. That is morally wrong to do. I oppose that. Sounds like he makes the argument for sentience or consciousness. What I will do is take that argument and take it to its extreme, see how it holds up. And it sounds like he's going to challenge me by not proposing real hypotheticals or real challenges. He's gonna venture to La La Land, where we have alien species that we've never actually discovered, where we can transport human minds into robots, and where we can determine that somebody born of two human parents would not actually be a human. So when the time comes that we actually discover those things actually happening, we'll humor them. But up until this point, I would think we should stick to reality and flesh out our positions as we know them to be true, as defined by science, as defined by reality. And that being said, yeah, I'm good to go. And by the way, sorry, I might have to go on mute here in a couple of minutes because my fiance is going to come home and my dogs are probably going to bark. So if that happens, just beware.
Yeah, no problem. Your opponent gets the time. So, Mouthy, if you want to go ahead and start with the response, and we're going to open up the floor.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing is just that, I'm curious what reductio as you think my position will lead to. I don't think there are any particularly counterintuitive conclusions that the position I've staked out will lead me to. But on the other hand, saying that a hypothetical is unrealistic is just not going to be relevant. I mean, sure, we can say that in the world we currently live in, it's unlikely for this to happen. But you could wake up tomorrow, this could be a dream. We could wake up tomorrow where in a world where these things are very likely, right? And so the point is just to show that if these things suddenly happened, even if they're unlikely, if they suddenly happened, your moral position would lead us to conclusions that we find very counterintuitive. And the fact that your position will lead to conclusions in these hypotheticals that are very counterintuitive, and what that indicates is that the moral criteria that you've laid out for what gives someone moral consideration does not actually align with our intuitions when we actually start to examine them in depth.
So where do you draw the line on abortion? You okay with it all the way up to term?
Well, I think that at the very least, a fetus is not going to be morally considerable until it has sentience. At the point when it reaches sentience, I don't have a super strong position because on the one hand, there are you do have to take into account once it has sentience that you are taking a sentient life. On the other hand, there are other considerations like the extent to which allowing abortion will increase the happiness of the people who might have access to them, or the families of people who have access to them. So, I mean, I don't have a very strong position, but I would at least take the position that at the point where, before the point where sentience is first reached, there is no reason to have any moral consideration for a fetus.
What does sentience mean?
Just the ability to have conscious experience, to feel things.
Conscious
right?
experience?
Like, sentience might be like, in order for something to have sentience, it would be the case that it would be like something to be that thing, right? Like if I thought about what it would be like to be a rock, it wouldn't be like anything to be a rock, right? But if I thought about what it would be like to be you, then it would be like something because you're having some sort of a conscious experience, some sort of sentience, right?
And how do you verify that something is sentient?
So, I mean, there are a variety of ways. So you can sort of take the integrated information theory route where you basically identify the essential properties of consciousness, which would be like axioms. And from there, you can infer the properties of physical systems that can account for it, which would be postulates. Based on those postulates, you can derive for any particular system of elements in a state, whether it has consciousness, how much, and what particular experience it is having. You can.
And how do you verify any of this?
Well,
Then hang on.
Yeah.
Make sure you give him a chance to finish his thought first.
Well, he's kind of talking. I don't know exactly how we can verify that sentience is present. I would
Well,
like
you can-
But he was kind of going through a list there of things.
Sure.
Just let him finish his thought.
Yeah, well, there's two things, right? So on the one hand, in addition to what I just said, you can create hypotheses about what neurological or biological features are necessary for or correlate with conscious experience. And we can verify or falsify those hypotheses by testing whether the presence of those features correlates with how we would expect organisms to behave if the hypothesis were true, et cetera. And an additional point is just that I've seen you in a lot of debates appeal to, scientific consensus, scientific authority, right? There isn't any reputable scientific organization in the world who would deny that we have relatively reliable correlates for sentience, right? You're taking an extremely fringe position. And I could send you multiple studies and multiple statements from academic organizations which are taking a contrary line. I also think that
okay.
Yeah,
Been
this
talking
whole
a lot.
question
Okay.
is also supremely irrelevant. to the
What
topic.
neurological and biological processes must be present for sentience to be confirmed?
Well, I mean, like a brain is probably necessary. Neuron activity in the brain is probably necessary. There are more precise things that we can look at.
But how do you have any sources that would confirm that an exact at an exact moment of development in the womb where sentience is achieved? Is there any sources you could send me for that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, just give me 1 second. But also,
Sure.
I want to point out
You defined it as conscious experience, right?
Yeah, like while I'm getting the sources for you, though, I also want to say that this is just going to be, I don't want to spend too much time on this because this is just going to be supremely irrelevant to the topic, right? So like, let's say hypothetically, right, we could with 100% certainty have access to the subjective experience of another person, right? At this point, would you still object that my argument that we should grant moral consideration based on the ability to feel pain, would you still object to that argument?
This is what I was saying about having to travel to La La Land to defeat my argument. Because we can't verify the subjective experience of another, so you can't use that as your argument. I want to know exactly when sentience is. I want to know exactly when sentience is achieved, and how can we verify that?
It doesn't matter if we can verify. My point is
it does.
Okay. My point is that it's possible, right? We could imagine a situation where we could verify it, right? And if we could, would you still object to the argument? Because if you wouldn't, then you're conceding your original argument, right? Because if you would say no, then you don't actually think that life makes the relevant difference. You think that sentience makes the relevant difference. You just think that we don't have any good ways of measuring that, so we should draw the moral relevance line at the beginning of life for practical purposes.
Sure.
Right?
So to answer your question, I would still object to it, but I think it is important to point out that your line that you're drawing for premise 2 in this equation, where my premise 2 is that human life begins at conception. Your premise 2 is that sentience is achieved at I don't know when. So I think it's just important to hammer that point, that you don't know where you even draw the line. That's what I'm pointing out here, and that's why I keep questioning on it, because it turns out you don't actually have any answers. It's all arbitrary. So
2 things. So firstly, I mean, I do have an answer, right? Our earliest estimate for when certain correlates with sentience have arrived in fetuses is somewhere around the 8-week mark. I can send you 2 studies on that I have on hand. But also, I just want to say that so your answer is yes, so you would still reject my argument, right? Which means this whole argument is just a distraction, right? The epistemic question of how we go about figuring out X is different from the question of if X is there or not there, does that affect the moral calculus, right? You have to provide. X is just sentience. I was just using it as a stand-in, right? What I'm saying is that you have to provide an argument that human life itself should be the source of moral value rather than the kinds of considerations that I'm putting forth, right? And clearly appealing to our lack of access to the subjective experience of other beings doesn't achieve that aim, right? So for example, right, to give you another La La Land hypothetical, if let's say that the entire universe was ruled by Satan, right? Satan couldn't change what the moral truth is, but he could make it so that moral truth was such that it consisted in a trait that was impossible to detect in someone in practical reality, right? What this case shows is that the fact that a trait is not detectable does not entail that moral worth does not in fact stem from that trait if we could detect it. It's just a fundamentally separate question.